Started. We have a contingent of folks joining us on Zoom this evening, so we want to try to get going on time.
Yeah.
I just wanted to start really quick and say on behalf of the San Luis Obispo chapter, thank you all for traveling to be here with us this weekend. It was a pleasure to host. It was really fun to spend a little in-person time, a little FaceTime with all of you. And
You introduce yourself.
yeah, I'll introduce myself. Sorry, I did actually need to do that. I know a lot of the faces in this room, but if I haven't had a chance to meet you and also for our people on Zoom, I'm Kristen Nelson. I have the opportunity and the pleasure to work on staff out of the state office as the Rare Plant Program Manager. So I work closely with Aaron Sims, if you know him. And then I'm also on the board here of the San Luis Obispo chapter as the Rare Plant Chair, and I've been working with our amazing volunteers on the chapter for a number of years now. And so thank you all for traveling to be with us. It was a pleasure to host, and also thank you to my comrades on the San Luis Obispo chapter. I think I did the least amount of work of all of the hosting crew, but yeah, there's a lot of work that went into this weekend. So thanks to everybody who helped put this together, and just thank you for bearing through our heat wave with us. It is actually not unusual to have about 3 or 4 days in the first half of September that are like 95 to 105 in San Luis Obispo. It happens most years, and we just never know when it's going to happen. So it was unfortunate, but we appreciate you bearing through it with us.
It was fun.
At least it's not 120, which it is in some parts of the state this week. Anyway, so I just wanted to share that gratitude, and I'm gonna now introduce Dr. David Keil as our presenter for the evening. And I just want to start by saying it is my sincerest pleasure to have this opportunity to introduce Dave. I'm sure that many of the people in this room are at least familiar with his name, if not also familiar with some of his many, many professional accomplishments and contributions to the field of botany. Everything from really significant contributions to the Flora of North America, to the Jepson Manual, including that Asteraceae section, to so many numerous species discoveries and publications. Frankly, there are just too many accomplishments to try and name and properly thank him for. So beyond his technical and scientific contributions to botany, I would say that one of his most important accolades is his nearly 4 decades tenure as a professor of field botany and plant taxonomy at Cal Poly here in San Luis Obispo. During that time, he trained many hundreds of budding young botanists how to be curious and passionate scientists and observers of the natural world. And I'm one of those lucky botanists that had the opportunity to be part of Dave's incredible legacy. And Dave Keil means a lot to me as a mentor, and as someone who has really instilled in me a lot of really incredible values as a scientist. And so I actually asked if I could be the one to introduce him tonight, because I wanted to indulge in just a little personal anecdote about how Dave has impacted my life, and give you all the opportunity to know him a little bit better in the way that I have had the chance to know him. So my personal anecdote is that it actually was not even known to me that field botanist was a job that you could have until after I completed my undergraduate degree. I didn't grow up in California where being a field botanist or a field biologist is relatively common. And when I discovered that, let me tell you, I was excited. It was the first time I considered that my job or my career could actually be something I was really excited and passionate about. At the time, I was working as an environmental consultant, and when I shared this excitement and enthusiasm with my boss, she said to me, in kind of a throwaway comment, "Kristen, if you're serious about being a botanist, you should go take plant tax and field botany from Dave Keil before he retires." And I don't think she expected me to take her up on that, but I took that as both permission and a blessing to actually go ahead and do that while still working full-time for her. So I did that, and my timing couldn't have been more fortunate. I took both of those courses from him in 2013, the very last year that he taught them solo before transitioning them to his successor and then retiring from teaching. And for me, it's not, the significance of those courses is not just about what they've taught to his generations of students. And let me tell you, technically speaking, what he teaches, the content of those classes is a literal crap ton. You learn so much in those two classes. But it was also about the way he would teach. It is the patience, humility, and passion that Dave brought to his teaching that allowed generations of young, unsure field botany students and gave them the ability and space to grow and develop into curious and conscientious young botanists and scientists. He possesses an uncommon humility and I think almost unlimited patience, to the point where if it is quite literally the 10th time you have brought him a piece of porphyrogyny flagellum, what it is, he will very patiently tell it to you and not make you feel dumb. He will not make you feel discouraged, and he will therefore not hamper your journey of learning. And that, to me, in his humble way, was so significant. I personally strive to be not only the botanist and the scientist that Dave has taught me to be, but also the mentor and the uplifter of others. So tonight, we all have the privilege to hear Dave share his passion for some of the beautiful plants that he has met and the amazing places that he has visited. So please join me in a very warm welcome for Dr. Dave Keil.
I'll just hand it to him. I want to welcome all of you to San Luis Obispo. And I guess you got a really warm welcome this weekend. Well, I want to introduce you to something that I spent a lot of time doing. I'm going to introduce you to the flora in more than one way. First of all, I want to mention what a flora is. It's basically a list of the plants that occur in a particular area. And that was how it was introduced to me way back when I was an undergraduate. It's a list of those plants that you can find there. It's also those plants that are in that particular place. It's not just the list, it's the plants in that location. And in addition to that, a flora can be a more complicated thing in that it is a way of sharing with others what those plants are. And providing a means of identifying those plants. So I'm going to introduce you to the book that I finally got published about a year ago. And some of the things that went into that, and some of the things about San Luis Obispo and its plants. So you'll see pictures behind a number of the text sections, like on this introduction slide, that represent places in San Luis Obispo where you're likely to see some of the plants that are part of that flora. So all of this is part of the introduction to the flora. So let's get started here. First of all, this is where we are. We're not part of Southern California. You know, we'd draw the line somewhere down there. And we don't quite fit into Northern California. It's up there somewhere. We call ourselves Central California, and we're about halfway between the Los Angeles area and the San Francisco Bay Area. The county itself is a pretty reasonable sized county. It's bigger than the two smallest states in the US, with a lot fewer people. The climate, take a look at that precipitation range. It's a in the western corner of the county, we can get areas with 60 inches of rain a year. And down in the southeast, it's like being out in the Mojave Desert, about 6 inches of rain a year. So all within one county. And we have a nice coastline area, so we have all sorts of coastal situations. Our highest peak is Caliente Mountain, which is about 5,100 feet, and it doesn't look like anything like the 5,100 feet you might meet up with as you're going up the western side of the Sierra. It's dry, 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 but we have a lot of wrinkles and crinkles and so on in the county, so there's a lot of variation topographically. And there's a little quote, many of you probably seen this at some point, consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil and spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed such as one of these. And this is one of our lilies. It's endemic to San Luis Obispo County. Well, I've been considering the lilies and other wildflowers for most of my life. I became a botanist early on. I knew by the end of my sophomore year in high school, I wanted to get a PhD in botany and teach at the college level. So I did that. And I went through excellent undergraduate education at Arizona State. I really became a botanist there, became a field botanist there, went on to Ohio State, got a PhD, and then started bouncing around trying to settle on a permanent job. And I came to Cal Poly in the fall of 1976 as a very junior faculty member. And my assignment was to teach classes like plant taxonomy and field botany. Now, I had traveled to California a couple times in the past, but I really didn't have much of a handle on California's flora. So I was scrambling like mad to learn the plants about one step ahead of the students. And I really wandered around trying to do field botany as often as I could get into the field. And lo and behold, I encountered this wonderful book, Vascular Plants in San Luis Obispo County, California, by Robert Hoover. Boy, was that a relief from having to fend my way through Munz's California flora. That was a monster of a book to deal with. And here we had a local flora that I could use to learn the local flora, to learn the plants I was having to deal with on a daily basis. And I had this wonderful resource. I wish I had the resource of Dr. Hoover to share it with. Unfortunately, Dr. Hoover had passed away 6 years earlier. Robert Hoover was Willis Lynn Jepson's last PhD student. He got his PhD from the University of California at Berkeley, spent a little bit of time in the Army during World War II. And in 1946, the year I was born, Bob Hoover started teaching classes at Cal Poly. On his interview trip to for the job at Cal Poly, he went out into the field and did field botany. He collected a lot of plants in the county and began the process that ultimately resulted in the publication of that flora. Unfortunately, his life was cut short by cancer, and the flora that he published was published posthumously 2 months after he had passed away. And Bob Hoover was a field botanist. He loved to get into the field. He loved to explore the backcountry. And he was one of the founding members of the California Native Plant Society. He was the one who founded the San Luis Obispo County chapter of the CNPS. And it was a thriving chapter when I came in 1976 and began to get involved. I got involved in the chapter fairly quickly, way ahead of my time. I got asked to be president of the chapter. I really didn't know what I was doing. But I floundered my way through for a year or two and then passed the torch on to someone else. And this is the legacy that I have behind me, because I have this excellent botanist who really understood and loved the plants in San Luis Obispo County as an example and as a teacher that I was following up on. The Hoover Herbarium at Cal Poly was named in his honor during that last year of his life when he was no longer able to teach. And the book, Flora itself, was published a few months, as mentioned, a few months after he passed away. There's a couple of the plants that Dr. Hoover named. He named a number of others in the county, but he discovered Ceanothus moretibus and Plumeria humilis, both in an area up in the northwestern corner of the county that he later recognized as the Cruzian center of endemism. It's a local area with amazing diversity of rare plants, and some of them live there and nowhere else. Couple of years after his passing, consortium of local botanists and photographers got together to publish a color supplement to his Flora. Hoover wanted to put color pictures into his Flora, but that just didn't happen because of the conditions under which the Flora was being published. There was a local group of CNBS botanists that put together this little booklet, which was available to me when I came to Cal Poly a couple of years later. So I came to Cal Poly in the fall of 1976. And I had gotten my PhD from Ohio State, far away from California. And I wasn't very familiar with California's plants, but I used his book to learn a lot about them. And I fell in love with the flora of San Luis Obispo County too. And did a lot of exploration. I taught at Cal Poly for almost 40 years. As Kristen mentioned, plant taxonomy and field botany were my bread and butter courses. So I taught a lot of students through those programs. And there are a number of folks in professional careers around the state and elsewhere that got their field botany training at Cal Poly, like Aaron Stubbs. He was one of my field assistants for a number of years. Well, we're going to talk about this new edition. Why the second edition? That's a lot of work. Well, there's a real benefit to having a local flora. If you sat down and tried to identify a plant from your county using the big resource we have today, the Jepson Manual, you're having to deal with all the plants of all the counties of California at the same time. And you're only interested in the ones that occur in your area. So having a local flora has a real benefit. Well, our local flora went out of print. There was a small print run and it wasn't reprinted. And so even if I wanted to use it in my classes, which I think I probably would have, it was no longer available as a resource that I could use for my students. Well, one big reason why there is a need for a new edition is there's a lot that's changed since Hoover's book was published. There's an area of taxonomic study called molecular phylogeny that has given us enormous insights into plant relationships that just weren't available when Hoover wrote his Flora. And we've learned so much about relationships that have changed what we thought we knew. And that has revised the classifications that we use. And a lot of names changed as a result of that. So the book was getting out of date. Plus, we keep going out into the field and finding things. There are now a number of species known from San Luis Obispo County that weren't known at the time that Hoover was here. Some of them are new to science. They're plants that weren't known at all prior to their discovery in recent years. Others are plants that were known in California but weren't known to occur here. Some of these are native plants, some unfortunately are weeds. We've had our influx of nasties as well as the discovery of new populations of natives. And we know a whole lot more about where they occur in the county because we've been to more places looking and documenting what's there. Well, what did it take to put this thing together? Well, what started me out on this, I was teaching all those students. And their frustrations with using Munz's California Flora as a textbook in the classes. Anybody who's trying to use Munz's, those of you who are old enough to have used Munz know the frustration. There were those new discoveries. Well, by the time I'd been at Cal Poly for a few years, there were enough of them that we had accumulated that together with a few students, I published a paper in Madronio, adding to sort of a supplement to Hoover's Flora, new to the county flora. The book was out of print. And I got asked to get involved in the production of a new California Flora, which became the Jepson Manual. Started out about 1983 or so, and it was published in 1993. So 10 years of process taught me a whole lot about writing floras. I didn't know that I had those skills in me at the time that I got started, but I started using them and it gave me some enthusiasm about the possibility of doing a new county flora. I was encouraged by CNPS numbers. I gave a talk to our local chapter one year, and Betty Hoover, Dr. Hoover's wife, was still an active member of the chapter, and she came up to me afterwards and encouraged me to keep going with this idea of doing a revision of the flora. Well, I finally decided to redo it in the 1990s. It was in the 1980s that the seed was planted, but I was still working on the Jepson Manual at the time. The Jepson Manual was published, and now I have this other idea of a flora yet to be produced. I was able to get a copyright release from Dr. Hoover's son, who had the University of California had returned the copyright to him. And I was able to negotiate a release so that I could use what Dr. Hoover had written, because it was good stuff. I didn't want to have to completely reinvent the wheel if I could use things that were already valuable resources that were published. And then I had a sabbatical leave to work on the county flora during the wonderful, wonderful, wonderful spring of 1998. It was an El Nino year, and it rained, and it rained, and it kept raining. It rained up into June that year. And I saw plants that year that I haven't seen since. They came out in places I wasn't expecting them. And I kept going out into the field because I had a sabbatical leave. I was not teaching classes that spring. And so I managed to get out in the field a lot and explore a lot and just sort of lit the fire to keep going. Well, writing a flora involves a lot of pieces. One of it is collecting samples. I wanted to become acquainted with those plants, not just as dried specimens or not just as descriptions written down in other floras. I wanted to see those things in live condition and to have a personal acquaintance with them. And I was finding some things like those plants that were showing up that wonderful spring. Took a lot of field notes, and I took a lot of pictures. Of course, those pictures were slides back then. And quality was not quite what it is today. And it cost money to get them developed. So not nearly as many pictures as I would take today if I were doing this, but that was then and this is now. I spent a lot of time studying specimens, especially those that Dr. Hoover had collected in the past that he used as the basis for the flora that he published. I had to keep up with the literature. Who's publishing what that is affecting the names that we're calling the plants and the classification of the plants. Writing a flora involves writing descriptions and keys. And that means getting a lot of details right. And making mistakes and having to go back and find those details that got wrong and fix those, and takes a lot of work. And a lot of editing. When you go back and find something that needs to be reconciled with something that's already written, and editing and editing and editing. And yeah. It was a family project in a way. My wife, Kathy, who's up here front, also the author of my shirts, by the way. And our two girls spent a lot of time in the field with me at various times, sometimes enjoying the wildflowers, sometimes playing in the vernal pools and so on. Michaela ended up drawing the picture of the San Luis Obispo lupin that's in the frontispiece of the flora. There were some detours along the way. I have this goal of producing a flora, but it didn't always go straight. For one thing, I kept having to teach classes, those students keep getting in the way of the research. 3 times a year, Cal Poly's in the quarter system, 3 times a year we had to get revved up to teach a new bunch of students a new set of classes, and that meant setting aside the flora and then having to pick up pieces later on. Where was I when I last looked at this stuff? I reinvented the wheel a number of times along that way. Well, in the process of the publication of the first edition of the Jepson Manual, I had to pick up the writing of the treatment of thistles of California because no one else was willing to take on this nasty bunch of plants. And so that made me a thistle expert. And so I was asked by the folks that were putting together the Asteraceae treatment for the flora of North America if I would be the author of the thistles for the flora of North America. didn't quite know what I was getting myself into, but I should have. But I ended up doing this, and we went on some thistle trips. My wife and kids have some anecdotes about thistle trips that they can tell you. But that took away time from working with the flora. And then with all the things that were happening, the Jefferson Manual was getting old and long in the tooth, and we were needing to put together a new version of it. And so I got dragged into, volunteered to get involved in the second edition of the Jefferson Manual, even deeper than I had been involved in the first edition. So that took up a lot of time. And then there was a self-inflicted wound. Shortly after I retired, I was asked by a colleague if I would take on the editorship of Systematic Botany Monographs. And thinking that I had lots of time because I was newly retired and no longer teaching all those classes, I said yes. And it was a bad decision. The 3-year sentence. And I had to really work to help the society find a replacement for me. And they would have been willing for me to go to my grave as editor of Systematic Botany Monographs, but I said no at that point. COVID came along, and it kept me from coming into the herbarium and visiting with colleagues and so on. But it turned out to be a wonderful time to spend time all alone out in the field, where I was the only person in an entire square mile of land doing botany. And so I got some great botany experience during that time, found some things that weren't previously known as locality and things like that. So it was good. Well, last few years, started to realize it's time to get this sucker published. And my colleague Matt Ritter has his own little publishing company, and Matt said, how about if I publish the book? And so we got into this, and we were finding our way. Neither of us had ever put together anything as complicated as a flora. And we both were finding our way to solutions, but sometimes with a lot of extra effort that could have been avoided maybe. But I kept going out and doing more field work and finding more things, because we're closing in on the deadline. I gotta find those things. And I kept finding some new additions to the flora. My wife kept shaking her head, no, finding more things. But editing and writing descriptions and writing keys and checking the keys and discovering the errors and fixing things and editing and so on. And we kept getting closer and closer. Now, Matt really made a big difference in this. Matt has his own little company, and so he has publishing experience. He knows a lot of things about publishing that I didn't know. And so he was able to make some decisions that I wouldn't have known how to make. He knew about the software for putting a book together. I knew Microsoft Word, but I didn't know anything more complicated than that. So he chose the right paper and the right cover binding and cover design, and Matt knows everybody. He's one of these people that he knows Peter Raven, who got connections with the former governor of California, Governor Brown. He's got connections everywhere. Matt was patient with me up to a point where he finally said, you gotta wrap this thing up. So in the fall of 2022, we were suddenly on the fast track and heading toward the station with various little minor stops along the way. And then it was published. And the official publication date, April 1st of 2023. I'd had it in my hands a month or so ahead of that, but we didn't let it out the door before then. So we have now the second edition of the county flora. There's some things about the new flora I want to tell you about, just some of the things we chose to do, and one is it's got a good durable cover for field use. We want this to be a field manual. We want you to be able to take it out in the field and use it and not have it fall apart into a bunch of loose pages, which I've seen some books do. So good paper and binding. The book that Hoover had published had an excellent introduction, and so I chose to use quite a bit of what Dr. Hoover had written, just updated and edited to where we are today. So there's a lot of good information about the county in the first part of the book. If you've got a copy of it, I'd recommend that you go ahead and read through some of that introductory material, because you'll find out some things you couldn't find out otherwise. We have some detailed county maps. This one is one that shows a lot of the major topographic features. There's a second map that matches this, that has drainages and other things and a number of other things along with that, the road network. Discussion of plant communities, discussion of various aspects of the flora of the county. Well, this time around, there are pictures in the book. Made sure we had some good quality pictures. Now we've got the digital cameras and everything, and the ability to take a lot of good pictures. Well, selecting through those took a lot of time, but we ended up with a lot of good photographs that illustrate things about the county and things about individual plants that are in the county. There's a sampler of the county flora, a lot of pictures of individual kinds of plants, and there's page references in the book to those photographs. So if you come across a plant that happens to have a photograph, you can flip to that page and see one of these illustrations. Several years earlier, I've been involved in the publication through our local chapter of wildflowers in San Luis Obispo. In fact, they went through a couple of editions, and there's a number of plants that grow wild in San Luis Obispo, particularly around the city of San Luis Obispo itself, that we chose not to illustrate in the flora, so that these pictures in the wildflowers in San Luis Obispo would act like a supplement to the book. So an additional set of pictures that are available to you. There's keys and descriptions in the book. Dr. Hoover really wanted to have descriptions, but that wasn't going to happen where he was at the end. And so his book had excellent keys and statements of where the plants were occurring in the county. They didn't have descriptions to compare with those keys. So this is a typical sample of a page or description of one species here. Just give you a little information here. There's a symbol for a number of plants. If it's a rare plant, it has this little leaf symbol. If it's an introduced plant, there's another symbol. So if you know a few symbols, you can get a lot of information about the plants. The nomenclature is as up to date as I could make it. This is a species that was described just a couple of years ago by Bruce Baldwin. I chose to have a common name for everything. First edition didn't have that. The Jepson Manual doesn't have it. It's very esoteric in the Jepson Manual as to what has common names and what doesn't. I find that there are a lot of folks who would prefer to communicate with common names. There are others who are erudite scientists like me that would say, no, leave those common names alone. Well, I tried to satisfy both, but the world of common names is chaos. And anybody who's trying to use iNaturalist will come across some of the weirdest common names that you've ever met up with. I came across one today. Obi-Wan Kenobi. That's the name that iNaturalist uses for a little plant that the Plantagenase. There are descriptions. Description is your way of finding out, am I really in the right place? If I've keyed it here, does it fit the description, or does it feel like I'm trying to shove my right foot into somebody else's left shoe? Which is what a good description should tell you. It fits or it doesn't. There's information about where in the county you're likely to meet up with this plant. Or at least where it's been documented from. Sometimes you find out that it occurs elsewhere, it just hasn't been found by somebody there yet. There are some selective use of synonyms. For instance, Leia glandulosa in part is what, Leia erubescens used to be called a coastal sand dune race of Leia glandulosa. Now it's been segregated out. And when you might be expected to find this plant growing in the field. The book is organized very differently than the first edition. Dr. Hoover's book was organized the way a lot of floras were at the time, which is using an antique classification called the Engler and Pronto system, which no one really understood. And it's a mystery to those who try to find plants in the Engler and Pronto system, as why things are where they are. But I've chosen to use results of our modern technology that tell us how plants are related to each other. And so the main groups are the lycophytes, the ferns, the gymnosperms, and the angiosperms. And the nice thing is, if you know your alphabet, you can find things. Within the major groups, it's alphabetical by family, alphabetical by genus, alphabetical by species, and so on. Just like the Jepson manual is. So if you're used to finding things in the Jepson manual, do it in this flora as well. There are informative running headers to give you an idea of where you are in the book. And there are those page references to the photos to help you would doesn't look like that. The book has a selective use of terminology. We botanists like terms. Boy, do we like terms. We've coined so many of them. But I figured there were some of them that you could live without. If they're only going to show up twice in the whole book, why not say what that term really means, where it would show up, and let's get rid of those little one of a kinds and few of a kinds terms, and just stick to the ones that make a difference. I've tried to use the terms in a way that does make that difference, and to give good definitions in the glossary that are as accurate as I could make them. Okay, a little comparison between what the flora was then and what the flora is now, as far as what we know. We now know that there are quite a few more native plants and quite a few more introduced plants in the county than Hoover knew about at the time. A few of the introduced ones have come into the county from elsewhere since he published the book. Others have been discovered in places that he had looked. In any case, we've increased the size of the known county flora by quite a bit. A lot of those are natives. And so we have a lot of plants, terminal tax, and that is whatever the variety, subspecies or species is, we have 1,500, native, taxa. And, fewer, but unfortunately too many introduced species. Quite a few rare plants in the county, spanning the county's, range from coast to, the far interior. And you can see the little symbol there saying, these are rare plants in the book. There's a couple that are new to science. They were described not in book, but published recently. The first one, President the Aphanantha, Kristen was involved in publication. She discovered this plant. She was doing a survey and found this chrysanthemum that didn't quite fit into any of the above. And she called me into the herbarium and asked me if I'd take a look at it, and I did. And I asked her what her middle initial was. Why? Well, because I need to know how to write your name out as the author of this new species. So, that one, and Botanical riggins, another plant from up in the Hoover Special area up in the northwestern corner of the county, that cruising in the center of endemism that he knows. And there's various native species that weren't known to at the time. Either he didn't go to the right place or wasn't there at the right time or didn't notice it or whatever. For some reason or other, these didn't show up in his flora, and so they're ones that have been added to the known flora. Couple of interesting little finds. In the first edition of the Jefferson Manual, Schultzia ramapadula was listed as possibly extinct. Well, we found it out on the Carrizo Plain. It's there in several places. And it's also known elsewhere in the state as well. So that was premature wording, but it was sort of a cue. Hey, watch out for this thing. Where is it? And then medium meal in California, a plant that's probably familiar to a number of you, was originally described from San Luis Obispo County, a collection in the 1870s, and it hadn't been seen again until Kathy and I found it one day on a hike near Rim Canal Mine. Well, a flora is a snapshot in time. It's what we knew then at that particular juncture when we had to put the book into print. And there will be changes. There's new discoveries. I know of at least 2, probably more plants from the county that didn't make it into the book because I didn't know they were there. Taxonomists keep investigating things, and sometimes that results in name changes. So name changes happen, and we keep having to deal with that. So you all got familiar somewhere along the line with Brassica nigra. Bye. Retarded nigra. And its best buddy, Retarda arvense. Well, the availability of the flora. Flora was so well received after its first printing that it was sold out. And we waited for a while, and our local chapter of CNPS decided to underwrite the production of a second printing. So just so what some of you were able to buy a copy of it today, that's because of our local chapter's efforts. So it's once more available. But it's also now available in an ebook format, if you're one of those folks that would prefer to use your device as a Flora rather than having to carry the brick with you. The Matt Ritter coined the description of this Flora as a brick because it's a chunky thing. I prefer to flip through pages. I'm not fond of doing the electronic key thing. But some folks prefer the lighter weight. And you can, if you want to get an electronic copy, scan that QR code. Now, closing things up here,
Could you go back to that 1 second? real quick?
oh, sure. Go back here. Mhm. So, my solo effort in poetry, it's never been published. Well, but a few pictures of places to visit, also Flacco Lake, some of you are going there tomorrow, I believe. And by the way, you have a brand new checklist, it's never been tried out before. So I want you to find all the weeds that didn't make it onto the checklist, because I based the checklist almost entirely on the consortium of California herbaria plants that have been collected on the Guadalupe dunes. And people tend to ignore weeds. An area near San Luis Obispo. I drove past this on my way over here this afternoon. This is just a display of tar weeds. This is up in that northwestern corner of the county. Looking up into one of the mountains of the San Luis range. Shell Creek, you've probably been to Shell Creek in the spring of the year, when it can be absolutely gloriously wet, full of wildflowers and people that are coming to enjoy the wildflowers. The owners of the property, and it is a private branch, have been very gracious in allowing the public to come onto their land over many years and enjoy the wildflowers. This is out on the Carrizo Plain, looking up into the Templar Range. Been out there a number of years and it's been like this. And say the streets of heaven are paved with gold, well, come visit us.
And if not, and you bought a Flora, or you still want to buy a Flora and you want him to sign it, I think you still have an opportunity to do that. You got, oh, sorry about that, Ty, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, when you're talking about all the non-natives and waste, we're just talking about in like relative wildlands, we're like looking in gardens and stuff like that, right?
See, I didn't quite catch the question.
Well, the non-natives and waste that you were talking about, you're just talking about out in kind of wildlands. You're
In
not,
wildlands, that's correct. Yeah. A waif is something that's growing in a wildland, but probably just happen to have a seed that landed there and it's not gonna keep going.
You mentioned that in your youth, you made several forays to California. Did you ever have an opportunity, because it was so close, to meet Dr. Hoover?
No, I didn't. The 1 year that I was in California at a time that he was still alive, was with some colleagues, and we drove from from Phoenix area up to Seattle to attend the Botanical Congress that was held that year up in the Northwest. And we tried to visit all the national parks we could en route there and back. But there wasn't a national park in the San Luis Obispo area, and I didn't know anything about Dr. Hoover at the time. I sure wish that I'd had the opportunity to meet with him and to spend some time in the field with him.
Kind of tangential, but when I first joined CMPS, people, I live in San Jose, probably 25 years ago. People talked about the chorizo, and it was like, nobody knew about it except the people in our chapter, but when you first started coming out here, were people aware of the chorizo being a wildflower? Did people visit it as much, or?
I went out to the Carrizo Plain on, I think it was my second year. The first year was a drought year. The second year, it was one of those great wildflower years. And got out to the Carrizo Plain. I didn't know at the time how important that was because everything was so new to me. This was my first year of seeing a California spring in all its glory. And I went to places like, oh,
Yes, we've all been there.
I wonder if you, can share. What were some of the key things that you did as an educator that you think were effective in getting your students excited and wanting to become botanists themselves?
well, I taught the plant taxonomy class, which was taught to a broad audience of students, some of whom were interested and some definitely not. And I tried to make it as interesting as I could to those. But it was the field botany class that was where took the students out away from all of their comforts, took them to a place and exposed them to the plants in the wild as a captive audience. We would go for 4 days in the desert. There weren't cell phones in those days, but there were, no contact really with the outside world other than some fellow campers in the campground. And there were students who learned so much on those trips. The first day in the desert, I would take them around and point out this and this and this and this and this shrub and that wildflower, and they'd come back. Oh, the fourth day in the desert. The fourth day, the morning of the fourth day, was a quiz on what they'd been seeing. And so many of them got those things right because they'd been out there quizzing themselves. They'd been out going on their own little field trips and coming back with a sample. What is this? And that's the kind of thing that really beats it home. And for some students, they were sold at that point.
There's infamously an after dark headlamp study session in the desert dry wash next to the campground on the desert trip. So he makes it sound like we just had 3 days to just kind of lollygag and study. No, it was 3 days of chasing Dave Keil around in the desert, and I literally mean chasing, writing everything you could, and it was after dinner that we would study.
I'm monitoring the online chat, and Nancy Moran says, I would just like to say what a joy it is to use this Flora. The careful work that went into it, the level of detail are wonderful. Anyone botanizing in adjacent county should get it as well. That's Nancy Moran.
I've known that for many years. Yeah, that's one of the things I found out about Flores is that the plants don't stop at the county line for the most part. They keep going, and so I recommend using this Flora in other areas as well.
Well, thanks again, Dave. And do take the opportunity to get it signed from him while you can, if you got a copy tonight. So, thanks so much.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
So much.
If anybody wants to hang on to the flowers.